Provided some very nice Christmas ornaments, which are back on the back table, and we will be raffling those off. So if you have not yet had a chance to put your name in for the raffle once.
No cost. Door prizes, so you're not buying the ticket, just make sure you put your name in.
Well, that's even better. Okay.
Yeah.
$0 raffle tickets, door prize.
Then I've got to update his list.
200.
No, because
Times 5.
you're going to need to recheck. Some people aren't getting your emails, and they're getting mine, so I'll have to recheck for them.
Did we start the meeting?
We can, with the mayors, it's a seat. Welcome. Yeah, this should be an exciting evening tonight, and you can already just kind of get a preview here. George Mcllveen is here with us and has a lot of exciting things to share with us. So let me go ahead and get us started so we can get to George. If you would, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Please be seated. Okay, I substitute this evening for the invocation, so please bow your heads for prayer. Lord God, thank you for the opportunities we have within this organization to serve our community. Lord, at a time when community and just basic principles are so important in our nation, Lord, thank you for the opportunities here together. I just pray for wisdom as we come together and serve in various ways and guide us in ways we can do even better. In Christ's name, amen. All right. Well, let me ask Barb, if you just please give us a brief treasurer's report.
Yes, and it will be really brief. Because, yeah.
See, I have to put up with this.
Now. All we did were deposits. We did not have any, we did not write any checks. And so our deposit, we have like $9,800+ in our account.
Okay.
And then after we approve some stuff today, we'll find that we, next month we'll have some more to report. But right now, that's it.
Great, thanks.
Oh, but part of that was a big deposit thanks to
I was gonna
the
say.
bartender here.
Yeah.
We had a deposit of $454.
Wow.
And the bartender, Paul Castro, was at work, and did, I'm sorry, we were on vacation.
Pictures,
We
if
wouldn't have
anybody
to-
wants to see this.
But I heard great things.
Yeah, I learned how to be a bartender.
He still doesn't know how to make a barbaccini, though.
Well, very good. So, yeah, we'll have a few things. We'll have our raffle. That'll bring in some money. We'll be having, in April, we have one of our big money makers with the track and field concession stand and such. So,
And I'll have the raffle tickets for Dennis's. He's got a real nice Lionel train, 1950s Lionel train. And George here, for our second prize, has given me what he's raffling off tonight, 3 gold plated Christmas tree ornaments. One is of the
Union Terminal,
the
Town Square.
and the boat, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Bridge,
They're really gorgeous. So
these are all made by Railway Historical Society as an effort to try to get funds to preserve railway items. And our location is over at the Entertainment Junction. And we have a library there, and we have some of my train things. I also build trains, and, other than the circus, for armored train cars in Germany and different things like that. I'm a military guy and always was fascinated by that. And so we send this stuff, the pictures over to China, unfortunately, and they make these things gold-plated, 24 karat on bronze, and then we sell them to different places to generate money for preservation of railroad items. But I donated to Mayor for their other event, and I thought you all might like to have. And one of my customers over here is the gift shop here in the village. She stocks and so forth. So if you have a motivation to want to get some more, why, they have them there. We try to support the local merchants that way.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Great job.
Well, very good. Any other new business?
I was just in a meeting today, and I don't know if you're aware that the museum center is going to close down for remodeling because they finally got the money to stop the leaks in the ceiling, etc. They're going to farm out items to different libraries throughout the county. They were asking us what we would like that we thought our community would find of interest, and I said because of the Madisonville site, I thought perhaps some things tied into that. Is that something you think would be of interest to the community? They would bring in some exhibit cases, probably attach them to the wall. We'll have some programming revolving around it. I mean, if there's another topic you could think of, that's fine, let me know. I have to tell them by Monday. But, but I just thought, that it would be something,
Oh, the Madisonville site would be
Professor
wonderful,
Tankersley
yeah.
so much, that people in the community might be interested in that. So I'm going to recommend that they go with something.
When would
that.
this stuff
Probably
come out?
start in spring of 16 and run through 19. They're going to be closed
Okay.
for 2.5 years. So we'll be
Wow.
at our location
Great.
for that time period. So, we'll see.
Give me all the information,
I'll say
and
if I
next,
find
not
out.
this bulletin, but the
Yeah,
next one.
I don't
we'll
know.
get
They
in.
probably won't know for a while, but
Okay.
I will. I'll let you know if we're going to get it. But I just want to make sure that sounded like something might make sense. It just seemed like a natural tie-in. It's like Green Hills said, oh, well, we were a WPA project, so let's get some stuff about the WPA. And so they're going to try to focus it on the different communities so they can tie it together. Like Madera has a Sears Roebuck house next to the library that's open for tours, so they're going to try to do some early 1920s, 1930s artifacts that would tie in with the Sears Roebuck house. So I said, well, hey, go with us. So maybe,
Great.
so there may be
Great,
some
thank
stuff at the library. I said I want a pterodactyl hanging from the ceiling. But, so we don't know yet what we're getting, but I'll go ahead and then put
Yeah.
in for some Madisonville site kind of stuff.
Great.
Just wanted to let you know. Okay.
Over the mayor's desk.
All right. Yeah, over the desk. I want that bird just.
Very good. Good, and Joe Stoner has offered to do our calendar again this year, and that's, that is a lot of work, and I think you'll agree with me that is first class. So, Joe will be preparing those, and then as they will be available, we have the opportunity to purchase those and give them as Christmas gifts, and they're just a wonderful, wonderful representation.
At the holiday meeting, whenever we have the holiday meeting.
Yeah. So, yes, next month, Brad Winstrup will be with us. The next one will be our, essentially, our November kind of Christmas combined meeting in the third Thursday in November. And at that meeting, we'll have our, Christmas kind of party pizza time, and then we'll have the calendars there.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
And we'll have the lady from Hamilton County Recycling at that meeting, so.
Yeah, which is always very interesting, what you can and can't, should and shouldn't recycle and such. I'm very interested. Good. Any other committee reports, old business? Okay, very good. Well, good, very good. Okay, well, good. And that's a preview of our schedule. And then again, remember we take a kind of a snow hiatus in January, February, and then we'll resume in March. There's a little forecast there. Well, I have the privilege of introducing George Mcllveen, and just a brief biography here. So George graduated from that great institution, University of Cincinnati, in marketing. He worked as an advertising manager for the Cincinnati Enquirer and retired after 41 years of service. So, yeah, great, again, a great institution of the city. The last 4 years, George has worked as the advertising and sales manager of the internet site civilwar.com. His office is located in Mariemont, and his website reaches 127,000 visitors nationally. Per month. Annually. That's great. George is a member of the Civil War Roundtable, the Circus Model Builders, the local chapter of the Railway Historic Society, and the National Model Railroad Association. George's presentation tonight is about the John Robinson Circus that we understand used to winter in Terrace Park from 1870 until 1929. So George, please come and...
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to try to talk without the microphone, although they were very kind to provide one. So if you can't hear me, kind of holler. And I'm certainly glad to be here tonight. I've enjoyed the last 4 years that I've been in Mariemont working for the Premier Internet, which is right over here in the executive building. And we're neighbors to Mrs. Gunn and her husband. And our company provides internet service, maintains websites, also develops and installs and provides telephone service to certain places within our building environment, I think, and beyond that as well. But the boss, fortunately, a fellow military person, I was a reserve officer after Korea, before Vietnam, and the infantry. And my boss is a lieutenant commander in Navy Reserve, so we still get along, because I know the Army can't get there without the Navy, so I made that acknowledgement to join the firm. But it's been a great environment here, and you know, it's kind of a second home to me, being here 4 years. I've been in Anderson Township for, I guess, 57 years. Met my wife here in town. She's from out of town as well. I came here with my father, I guess, over 1949 from Pittsburgh. And he was in the steel business, and he joined Newport Steel, so I was very much involved with that. And he decided to relocate, and he would plunk me in a hotel room. And fortunately, I was a dutiful young man, and I did what I was told, and I stayed there, and I built little train models he gave me to keep me busy. And that's how I got interested in model trains many, many years ago. And because he always liked to circus himself when he was a boy, we went down to the Ringling Brothers. That's why I brought some of this material here. It was my first introduction to a circus. And they had a huge facility there. I was about 1945. I was probably about, I don't know, 8 years old or something like that. And they had a 500-foot tent they put up. They had 3 rings in there, and you couldn't possibly ever watch all the rings at one time because of too much activity. They had a menagerie, which is an animal tent. This is a very small-scale model. The Ringling Brothers probably would be in scale twice as long as this. But John Robinson had a large tent, maybe 300 feet. And then they have a menagerie here, and they did too. They kept all the cages for the animals out of the weather, so that's what the menagerie came about. This depicts Tilly the elephant. It happened to be John Robinson's elephant. And he had a hippo, Congo the hippo, and that's depicted here. And then they had, of course, back in those days, they would have freak shows and that stuff. We don't talk about that much today, because we don't try everybody treat them equally. But I was fascinated by the circus and got really enthused with it. Later, when I got into trains, when he came down here to Cincinnati, we lived in Fort Thomas. I continued going to Ringling Brothers and enjoyed it, and started building more model trains, and then I thought it'd be neat to have a circus train, so I kind of modified that. Then I got involved with the model builders and started building basically John Robinson equipment, although our title of our local model builders group was the John Robinson Show. And so I knew it was here in Cincinnati at Terrace Park, but never really paid a lot of attention to it until I saw in the end car a story about Tilly the elephant in Terrace Park, or the John Robinson Show. And I thought, gee, I didn't realize that this is where they were headquartered, although our club's name was that. And so I went out to Terrace Park Historical Society, which basically is anchored in some schoolrooms at the back of the Terrace Park St. Thomas Church. And they provided a nice spot for them down there. The only problem for somebody my age, I'm 82 now, and when I built some things for them, I was 79. And even carrying stuff down 2 flights of stairs was a little too much for me. But they provided me one cabinet with 3 shelves in it I had to retrofit. And I built basically one 30-inch vision of this. And then I built another 30-inch long vision of the train coming to town. So this is kind of one site consolidation of both ideas. And you'll see it depicted on shelves if you want to take a minute or two after we're finished to take a look at it. They had a great deal of things. What prompted me to build it was the fact that they had no pictures in color of any of the equipment John Robinson had. He had beautiful wagons. You can see them depicted on the far side over there. The 10 wagons that were left, and I can tell you about that in a little bit. They had railroad cars that were colorful. You got to remember that these were like traveling billboards of the circus. So when they went through towns, you would see John Robinson splashed all over the side of a railroad car, and it was on wagons and so forth, and on the flat cars and the horse cars and the elephant cars. But they didn't have any of those cars depicted, and certainly not in color. They had a tent pole. They had beautiful costumes of the different dancers in the show. They had bandwagon costumes. They had some other memorabilia, a lot of civic things out there in Terrace Park, and but no depicted wagons showing what it looked like. And I thought, you know, if kids ought to see this stuff, because the circus is really a dying area. You're getting shrink further and further and further along. They're moving off the railroad cars and going into trucks and so forth. And unfortunately, environmentalists are driving them crazy in terms of the way they treat the animals. I'll mention that. I'll just take a minute this time. You have to remember that these elephants, they're a ton and a half, which is the issue that they had with PETA, are a very valuable commodity. They're worth $250,000 a piece. Might have to be brought from Africa or Asia, depending on the type of elephants they are, and they have to be trained and so forth, so they baby them. They're brought in now in an air-conditioned railroad car, like a baggage car. They're air-conditioned, they're heated. Their crew sleeps in the same cars with them in bunks. You can imagine sleeping in that environment. But they're there to take anything that they need and so forth. So they're very well protected. But then they complained about they were being forced to march down 2.5 blocks from the Montgomery Inn boathouse along the river down to Coliseum. I'll get off my soapbox in a minute. But anyway, to kind of comply with PETA, because there was bad treatment of animals, there wasn't any question in the early days. They bring up a truck from the Coliseum and they back it up the door of the railroad car. They unload the elephants from the railroad car right to the truck. They take them down, drive them down 2.5 blocks. They take them off, put them in a tent to keep them warm and safe the whole time. But they're so fed up with it all, they're going to eliminate bringing the circus animals in. So, you know, although they've accomplished something, I think people have lost a lot in terms of seeing some of these beautifully trained animals. And if we have more time later, I have a tendency to talk too much. I'll tell you some, I think, interesting stories about Ringling Brothers and their animals, and John Robinson and his love for his animals. Now, the reason that the circus originally, as well as many other elements, were originally carried over roads with horses, and they were pulled. These wagons that you see here depicted. This is a circus wagon here. They were pulled over the road by a team of horses like this. Originally, everything was carried that way. And you have to remember that they could only go 30 or 50 miles between shows because the strain on the animals. They had, I mean, PETA didn't have to tell them this. They knew that they could not mistreat these animals because they couldn't haul that kind of load any more than 30 to 50 miles. And so these shows were that frequent in distance from one another. Now, one significant thing happened in transportation that helped both the Civil War as well as later in the circus. What happened was they developed trains and train cars, passenger cars, flat cars, animal cars around 1850. And they started laying tracks east and west, north and south. The north had more railroad track and equipment than did the south. They had trains going east and west and from Chicago down to Cincinnati until they hit the river. Then what they had to do, taken off the train, taken across the river in flatboats, preloaded on trains, and shipped south. So the ability of the railroad to carry a locomotive on a bridge was really contingent on how fast things expanded. They purposely did not complete the suspension bridge until after the Civil War, fearing the Confederates would attack the city and hold it for ransom. And that was a goal of the Confederate forces. And so Lew Wallace came here to Cincinnati after he was deployed at Shiloh Battlefield. He was a guy, Ben-Hur, wrote Ben-Hur. And he was sent here by Lincoln to check our area for defenses out in Fort Mitchell area. And so he established gun batteries and dug ditches and so forth. They confiscated African-American people in west end of Cincinnati, marched them across the pontoon bridge and out to Fort Mitchell to build earthworks. And that blunted the attack of the Confederates attacking Cincinnati. They were going to capture it, hold it for ransom. So anyway, the Union forces adapted the cars for passenger for the troops, the flat cars that carry the cannon, and the ammunition wagons that pulled the cannon, pulled again by 2 to 4 horses over roads. And you can imagine it was like one that through a muddy road. They had to maybe take 10 horses to pull a wagon out of the mud. And they were very susceptible to being attacked. So that's what they developed, and then used it effectively to help win the war. In fact, Wallace was in the Augsburg battlefield in Maryland when Confederate forces attacked with 5,000 people, 5,000 men. He only had 2,000 troops and blunted the attack long enough for Grant to bring troops up from Richmond by train out to that place to reinforce it and stop the attack. It was the end of the war, and had they been able to succeed and capture Washington, the whole outcome of the war might have been different. So trains were really a critical part of transportation, but the circus realized after the war was over, they had excess equipment. Instead of hauling all these wagons over the road and having all these conditions, why not adapt it for the circus? So the troop cars became passenger cars or worker cars to sleep in and ride in coaches depending upon your status. The flat cars were then reinforced to carry these heavy wagons. Some of these wagons were maybe a ton and a half. They had then animal cars for the horses, and then they reinforced an elongated animal car for the elephants. And Tilly the elephant and his 2 or 3 companions rode in that elephant wagon. And he then developed very exotic looking wagons, which are depicted over here. And you might pass around those colored sheets. Okay. Does everybody got a colored sheet? There you'll see how the wagons were pulled by horses initially at the top. And then the second would be how the Union Confederate forces adapted it for military uses. And then third, these are not great color pictures. I'm not a good photographer. In fact, I slipped up and used the Roswell magnetic strip to show the projector. But in any event, the third shows how the circus then adapted this equipment in the third stage from excess equipment. You might say, well, they only did that once. That's no true, because here you can see how Ringling Brothers in 1950, right here, as the World War II was coming to the end, these originally were hospital cars. This was an opening for the stretchers. These were racks where they kept the racks for the stretchers for the wounded people. They had a small operating facility here, and a doctor aboard these cars. Unfortunately, due to heavy losses in World War II, these medical cars were turned into funeral cars. And they put all the funeral caskets here and redistributed them across the country. So they then, after all that was over, they had excess equipment. So what Ringling Brothers do, they took these cars, made them into tunnel cars for wagons. They used them for passenger cars or former sleeping cars, and also had it for animal cars. So they're, and if you go down to Naples today, north of the Ringling Brothers mansion, where they have beautiful artifacts that he bought overseas, you'll see stacks of passenger cars, like cordwood, 3 of them high, with the wheels taken off. They retrofit the wheels, they grind them again, make them Amtrak standards, then they tear out the inside of the car and rebuild it to use for performers or whatever purpose they need. So they're constantly recycling this stuff, which is good. the Robinson show, as you can see with the Ringling Brothers show, color is very important to attract people to come to the show. This one global hemisphere wagon of Ringling Brothers had over 14 horses pulling. Right here, you can see it later. Robinson in the final stages, I might take a minute to explain about his background, but he eventually had about 70 different wagons, very unique with bay windows, exotic half-moon bird cages like this. This is a very small version of it. He built a peacock band wagon, and this has steps in its side, so the band, the trombone player would be in the front so he didn't have anybody's hat off. And then the band had a big drummer and so forth, and they would go as part of the parade to attract people like the Pied Piper, the last stage of going to the circus. And over there you'll see depicted on one of the last poster, the last 10 wagons that were sold off in 1927 as he went back, started to go bankrupt because it was getting into the Depression era. And then the other depicts the different stages of the circus, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Take a little water. But they also had other interests beside the circus. They had, I think, a bank here. They had a poster, a firm here that would print posters for the circus, would show a tiger or a fierce picture, or they would show John Robinson riding 2 horses bareback. He was about 6'4" with a red beard, very striking figure, and a showman like Ringling Brothers, like Barnum and Bailey. They all had to be a showman. And what they do then is they would send out an advance card 2 weeks before the circus, and they would print up in the small space in the poster what city, what time, and so forth the circus would be 2 weeks ahead of time. But his family came here to New York from Wales. They were farmers, and they built a grist mill up there. I think the original Robinson had 7 boys and 2 or 3 girls, but back in those days, farmers had enough family to take care of the farm themselves. But the older boys in England would acquire the major part of the assets of the father, so John Jr. realized that he had no opportunity there with his dad's grist mill. The uncle had a farm, but he had 4 sons, so he knew that he couldn't do work for him in the long run. But in the short run, he handled the horses. He did the training. He did the grooming of the horses. He trained the horses. Eventually became very proficient using horses. And he said to his dad finally, as there was a menagerie traveling animal show going through town, you know, I don't have a career here as much as I'd like to stay with you and the family. I've got to make my own way. And he said, well, that's what I told you. You have to develop your own career. So he joined the menagerie, and he handled all the horses and trained them and rode them in the menagerie show. The menagerie is just an animal show, not with a tent, the acrobatic things that were going on at that time. Eventually he got into a partnership with a circus, and he was a smaller partner, but he learned all the aspects of the circus business, of tickets and running the back operation, dealing with very performers that could be very eccentric and kind of dominating, and depending upon who they were. And some of these European high-rise, high-trapeze people were very hard to deal with, but he was able to learn how to deal with that and cumulative relations and so forth. So he knew all the aspects. Eventually he bought out his older partner. At the highlight of their career, they had over 33 rail cars and probably over 70 of the wagons, up to the point of 1927 when he sold off the 10. Those are the only remaining 10 in the United States. Some went to Ringling Brothers show in Florida, near Naples. Some are up at Baraboo, Wisconsin, a few were left up there. Some in Peru. Now he sold because he didn't want his arch competitor, Ringling Brothers, to get any of this equipment, he sold these 10 beautiful wagons to Hagenbeck Wallace in Peru, Indiana. And that was their headquarters. And they, in turn, after a year or so, maybe half a year, they went bankrupt or getting to go bankrupt, and they sold their equipment to American Circus, who then folded, and they sold to Ringling Brothers. Now, this is the tragedy of it all. These are hand-carved wooden wagons. The art of carving wagons is, and they would have, they might have serpents on them, or they might have animals on them. They were just all hand-carved, beautifully done. But this one Ringling member took all those wagons in the middle of the field and burned them to the ground. So that's why I kind of titled this, competition is always a good thing. But sometimes the guy you're a competitor with will come back to haunt you. And they claimed that it was because they needed to steal for a war effort. When World War was over, World War I was over, in 1917, we're coming up in the 100th anniversary. I'm doing some promotion for the 100th anniversary of the World War I, which is in 2017, the end of the war right now. The government, unfortunately, established a commission with 2 presidents on it to honor the World War I, but they never gave them any money. So we're trying to do some pro bono publicity for them to promote it. And as a result, why that wasn't the reason. World War II hadn't started. That was 1945, and this is 1929. So that wasn't the reason. I think what happened was these were wooden wagons, very hard to maintain. They might have had 20 coats of paint. You know, they handled them beautifully to keep preserved the color. But the weather deteriorates the wood, and they rot out. So I think because of that, and they were getting away from wooden spoke wheels with steel rims to inflated, not inflated, but hard rubber tires around spokes for the wheels. So I think they felt it was much more easy to maintain. They kept a few of the pretty wagons they could maintain and burned the rest of the ground. So I think that was an unfortunate circumstance. But fortunately, these 10 were preserved, and John Ringling North, who was a philanthropist in Florida, had built this beautiful museum and bought artwork from all over Europe. I think rebuilt, 5 of the wagons, and other places like Peru rebuilt theirs. And the field people that own Ringling Brothers had their equipment up at Fairview, Wisconsin, preserved some of those wagons. Those are the 10 you see up there. And then the leave behind I've got for you, it shows a story about competition, always a good thing. I think there's a little story there about Ringling Brothers and circuses traveling by rail and originally by wagon. And you can see that equipment in a closer vein. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'm glad to open up to any questions if you have time. I don't know whether I've hurried up too much or trying to get things out of here because I know you like to get out by 8. There's 3 stages of the circus, and one is the baggage car, PR car, that goes out 2 weeks ahead of time. And in your flyer, you'll see a sheet with the last poster over there that shows this baggage car. And they would hook it to a regular passenger car and put it on a train, regular passenger car train, 2 weeks in advance of the show. And inside would be the PR people. They're doing a press release for the newspaper. They would take these posters that had a blank in for the date and the time and the arrival of the circus in that town, and they would set type. They had a hand crank press. They would print that information in the center. They would have men that would go out from these bunk cars and deliver them to 5 and 10 cent stores or a drugstore or maybe a barber shop and get them to put it in the window for advanced publicity. And they would give them tickets to the show as remuneration for what they did. They would take the story to the reporters and buy them lunch. If they gave them a good story, maybe the year before, they might buy them dinner. I worked at the Enquirer. Initially, a reporter couldn't have more than a $25 compensation or a meal from any person trying to get publicity, and eventually they said no remuneration. So that's how that whole scheme of things changed. But this was all prior publicity plus big billboards they would put up in town. They rent the space and put them up. And then the second stage, that car then would go on to the next scheduled train stop for the circus, maybe 200 to 300 or 400 miles away, because with the train it could go that far, carry heavier equipment, longer distance, and it was better for everybody. The second stage was a passenger car that was modified as a bunk car for the roustabouts who would put up the circus tent and so forth. They had animal trainers aboard. They had the kitchen equipment people and the cooks there provide food for the people setting up the circus tents 2 or 3 days before the show would start. And sometimes they would use like Tilly the elephant to put up the tent pole. And they aboard on the wagon, they would have, on flat cars, they would have the canvas, they would have the tent poles, they would have the kitchen equipment, everything they need to feed and get these things up. And sometimes they'd invite the kids to come down to help them pound the steaks in or help them do some minor things around the show in order to get a ticket to go to the show. And then finally the third stage, which is depicted on your sheet there, is a passenger car or performer sleeping car. Then they would have a flat car which would contain, as depicted here, this is a depiction of the last stage where here you have a passenger car back here, those performers. You have a flat car here with some of the wagons, animal car which contained the horses, and I doubt if they carried an elephant at that stage. Then they would proceed off the wagons pulled by horses, and they'd be hooked up to as a parade, and they'd go through town like the Pied Piper and try to get people to go to the circus. So that was the last stage of the circus event, and that's kind of an overview of how they were organized, how they advanced for transportation. Something about the background of the family. There's a lot of other interesting stories. If we have time, I can maybe get into some of that. About other animals and other shows and other situations that dealt with the animals, and about John Robinson and so forth. So let me just ask me a sip of water. My sign is packing up. Does anybody have any questions about what I've talked about? Yes.
Where in Terrace Park were these located, and what years were they there?
Well, they were there, I think, as early as 1840 through 1929 when they went bankrupt. And I'm not quite sure of the location. It's out further. Eventually, the farm was sold off and homes were built in that area. But they did have a huge, I might cover this off too. Now, John Robinson idolized Tilly the elephants and all his animals. And they were kept there in a secure place in a huge barn. And they dug down 8 feet with a ramp, went underneath the barn. And that's where the elephants were carried and kept down there with hair, keep them warm, and water, what they might need. And on the top part, they would keep some of the animal cages, and they had a separate door that went in the back. And unfortunately, somebody asked me earlier what happened when Tilly died. Well, unfortunately, they had to drag him out with horse team, with chains and so forth. And I won't get into some of the aspects of what they had to do to get him out of there. But eventually they had to do something with him to find a big enough hole to put him in. So they found a septic tank in that area. And they put him in there with things to kind of make the body just dissolve eventually. Covered it up with dirt. And eventually that property was sold to somebody who bought this house. And they smelled this funny smell in the back and realized that they had dumped off this elephant down there, which wasn't very nice. And they finally had to disinter it and move it to some other location. And it was an interesting story. I had a talk at the Episcopal retirement facility down here in Hyde Park. And there was a very great showman, Mrs. Nelson, who had a home in Terrace Park. It was occupied by some of the family and acquired some of the memorabilia that they had there was left over from the circus days. And she talked just brilliantly about how when this elephant was dying, he knew Robinson very well. And Robinson, during his dying hours, held his trunk in his hands until the elephant died. And then they just, got him out of there and took care of things. And there's a lot of funny other stories. But I can't give you an exact location. I never really got into that so much, but it was in that general area, past where the school is over there someplace. But there was railroad tracks that went there. They actually loaded the animals on those railroad tracks and went. It was very centrally located. When I was at the Enquirer, I would sell it back to advertisers from out of town. The Cincinnati is within 600 miles of 60% of the U.S. population, east and west. And that's why P&G's headquartered here, Kroger's headquartered here, a lot of places are. Because it's easier to transport from this location. Any other questions? Yes, Mayor?
There were quite a few circuses at that time, right?
Yes.
How did they divvy up the territory? Did not, I don't know if they were competitive.
Well, they had advanced people going out to these different areas and acquiring the predecessor Madison Square Gardens in New York. They would get some other facility or ground someplace else. I think they had a general idea of when the circuses would be in certain areas. For example, earlier when Ringling Brothers would come to town, there used to be a shrine circus. It was out, I think, in the gardens out there where the basketball used to play. And they would try to avoid being in town at the same time because Ringling would draw a bigger crowd than they would. Although they were a wonderful little show. It made up a composite of different acts that would draw in together for a show. And sometimes they would split up and you wouldn't have the same shrine circus everywhere. There's a composite wherever they could bring in whatever event they had, and they try to coordinate the time. So I'm not sure how they did that, but it's a good question. Unfortunately, John Robinson would beat Ringling Brothers to the punch in New York enough that he hated him enough that they decided to burn down the wagon. So yeah, can't be too competitive. Now I started out with the Enquirer, talking about competition, when there was 3 papers in town. And the Enquirer at that time, the morning paper, was the 3rd paper. And I was able to survive to be the ultimate paper. And I survived, I think, 8 publishers and 11 vice presidents of advertising. I've stayed there 41 years, which is a rare commodity in today's world. But I could write a book about that. Maybe I will before I leave this room. You talk about eccentric people. I had publishers that way, including Carl Linden, who was a great man for the city. I don't mean to mean that, but he had his idiosyncrasies that you had to do it his way or no way. You know? That's why he's so successful. Yes?
These trains were pulled by privately owned locomotives, or were they?
Yeah, they were private. They didn't have their own rail locomotives. They had their own equipment.
Okay, but the locomotive was whatever.
And so they'd have to, and of course with the railroads and the unionization of railroads, you got in a lot of strange situations where they could only have a crew run maybe 600 miles and they had to change crews. Well, hopefully it was the same railroad. Otherwise, they had to rendezvous and change equipment over from one place to the other. I had a funny story. I got to know the man who was in charge of transportation for Ringling Brothers because I've been so involved with him. And he liked Cincinnati chili, so I got on his good side by sending some dehydrated Cincinnati chili down there. And so he made arrangements for me to meet the train master who came in for the last show, I think 2 years ago. And he invited me up to see his quarters. We weren't allowed to see the private quarters of the performers or the other people. And a huge train. It was over, I think, 70 cars long. But they had their own equipment. He had, in his compartment, had a half of a baggage car. He had a sleeping room. He had a little living room. He had a desk to do his reports. And he had another little area. And then the other half of the car was a machine shop to make any kind of part they would need for the train. They had all the spare parts, huge chains they would use to lift the car off the track, to put new wheels in. They have pre-positioned sets of wheels all across the country. And they have cranes all ready to come in, lift them off the trucks and slide in the wheels and off to the next stop. But he was 18 hours late coming into Cincinnati because the train ahead of him didn't have any access air brakes. And so they were held up 18 hours. They got into Cincinnati the day of the show. They had a train convoy of, I think, 60 wagons were towed by the tow trucks down to the circus location, the Coliseum. And they finally made it. They were only 2 hours late. But they're a very well organized operation down there. And they have mail sent to pre-positioned locations ahead of time for the people on the train. They live on a train, they have a compartment. Depends on your status. If you're a big performer, you get a half of a railroad car. if you're a performer, an average tight rope person or something like that, you might get a roomette. If you're a roustabout or worker on the train, you get I think it's a 6 foot by 6 foot area with a bunk that folds into a wall and a desk part of it. It's a small compartment about 3 foot wide, you hang your clothes in, and that's about it. You have a shower down the way and so forth, and you have to, and then they have you call it a cookie car or a commissary dining car, and you can get some kind of a sandwich 24 hours a day, but there's preset times when you go to meals, and usually coordinated with when the show is. And they would park the passenger cars up by Lunken Airfield across the way behind Dinner Distributing. And then there would be bused down to Coliseum. And then the elephants and the other animals would be taken in railroad cars and parked down by the Coliseum by Montgomery and Boathouse. And there'd be maybe 70 flat cars that carried in all the wagons. And the elephants had their own accommodation. And then they would go closer. And so these things were all connected close to the different arenas in which they would play. So that's Mariemont. Is there any other questions?
George, could you tell us a little bit about your other project?
Oh yeah, I will. One of a couple of funny things. As I say, my great love is Ringling Brothers. And here you'll see, I don't think you can see it very well, Gargantua the gorilla. Now he was bought in Africa by a ship captain. And he was his pet. And you know, you're dealing with a big animal when they're cute when they're little, but they're very powerful. And so eventually he progressed in size, and he got in a dispute with one of the people on the ship. And he said, next port, you're off, you're finished. I'm not going to deal with you, you're not doing your job. We can't, everybody has to pull together to get their job. And that guy went out into the city, bought acid. A very nice subject, but that people, retribution is a strange thing. And he bought the acid back, and when he was getting ready to leave the ship, he found Gargantua and threw it in his face. But the ship captain realized he got him back to a veterinarian in New Hampshire and gave it to him if he would treat him right and raise him and treat the scars on his face. And Ringling Brothers came along when this thing got too big to handle and put him on his show. And he promised he would take good care of him. So because he had this corroded face, he developed the name Gargantua to depict the ugly face he had. To me, gorillas are kind of ugly to begin with, but depends on your liking, you know. Well, and here's the neat thing. Ringling Brothers bought the first use of air conditioning in the United States from Carrier Air Conditioning. They took this wagon, steel reinforced with bars, put glass in front of the bars closer to the gorilla because they're afraid people would sneeze and further contaminate his face. And because that heat would be too much, even though they came from Africa and Asia and so forth, they air conditioned. It was one of the first uses of air conditioning. And like any promoter, you think, well, gee, if I got one, if I get the mate, we might have small offspring and we can continue this thing. So he then went out and found a female Linnea Toto right here. And she had an accompanying air conditioning wagon. And they had a door where they could get together, but unfortunately, Gargantua didn't like her and would throw tires at her, which wasn't a very nice thing to do with your wife. And I know I wouldn't have been say married if I did anything like that. So they said, well, we're going to show them both, we're going to keep them apart. So that's what happened. And although other people, our zoo has been very great about developing animals and raising animals and so forth, Ringling Brothers didn't have much success with that. I thought that was kind of an interesting story. And I told you about Tilly the elephant and Robinson's love of that. Interesting stories about Terrace Park. One time, a cheetah escaped from a cage and terrorized, the police chief is here, they were out looking for the cheetah to try to kill him because he was terrorizing the whole community. Everybody had to go into their house and hide. And unfortunately, a couple of dogs found out to be a dinner for this cheetah. They didn't get any children, fortunately. That was one interesting thing that happened. And so there's a lot of things. Oh, one other thing about Ringling Brothers and the trainer. Ringling Brothers realized that there was a Gunther William family in Germany who were great trainers. He had 25 elephants. Mind you, these are worth $250,000 apiece. And he had unusual round-top wagons. And of course, the railroads in Europe were four-wheeled cars, train cars, a different configuration than our tracks. So they said, we don't want any of the transportation equipment, but we want the wagons, we want the animals, we want the trainer. And so they brought Gunther Williams over here to the United States. And he was a big gun, and he trained, and he would ride on top of the elephant with a tiger on top, and he rode on top of the tiger. Great, great showman, Gunther. And some old circus had a need for an elephant, so they contacted Gunther. He said, you know, you have 25, you can't use them all. How about selling one? He said, all right, I'll sell you one, $250,000 American. And the trainer is $25,000. And the guy said, I'll take the elephant, and I'll take good care of him, but I'm a great trainer of animals, I don't want the trainer. He said, you've got to have the trainer. No, I don't want it. All right, he said, I'll sell you the animal. You come with a truck and take care of it. Promise me you'll take care of it. He's all yours. So off he went to this little one-ring circus someplace in Indiana. 2 weeks later, called Gunther up. He said, I want my money back. He said, why? You paid for it. He's a good animal. He's healthy. He can pull 10 pulls up and all that stuff. He said, I give him commands and he doesn't pay attention to me. They said, that's why you need a trainer. All he knows is German. True story. So I'll take this time now to show you something else I've ventured into, because I'm a great Civil War buff, as you can tell, and a great fan of Lincoln, what he did for the country, emancipated people and everything else he did. He was also a great tactician military-wise. If he didn't like what a general did, he'd kick him out. How he acquired that knowledge, I don't know, for a lawyer. But when he died, he was under threat of death even as he came through Cincinnati on his show, to go be inaugurated in Washington. His inaugural trip came through Cincinnati. And he got off the train fearing, because Pinkerton, I think, Chief is here, I think Pinkerton was his guard. They didn't have Secret Service at that time. He got off the train 30 miles early and was in a privately carried carriage into Washington with Pinkerton guards, snuck into Washington, was inaugurated. He was under threat of death even in his early years of his first administration. And after they won the war, he was assassinated by Booth, as you know. Well, they were in the process of building a car for him like, you know, Bombing 747, but it was a railroad car. And so they built this maybe to be armor-plated to protect it from bullets and so forth. But before they got it built, he died. So they revamped the car, left the wheels as they were, 4 sets of wheels to carry the heavy weight. And he went from Washington all the way across to Springfield, Illinois, making 12 stops. But they elevated a platform where his coffin stood on top of it, so that the thousands of people stood along the tracks to watch him go by 10, 15 miles an hour were able to view the coffin and pay their respects to him. He was then taken off the train in 12 stops and hauled by a hearse driven by 6 horses to the presentation area. 200 or 300 people were in a riot. They tried to break through to see him. 2 or 3 people died. They got shoved out the windows and upper floors. People don't know about that, but they were so idolized him that they wanted to see him. So anyway, the man who built the duplicate of the car out of his own pocket, railway tycoon, would build railway cars for different enterprises, rebuilt the locomotive, pulled him and this entourage over to Washington, built the railroad car, spent $740,000 building this car. And our website, we've been promoting all the locations for it. The last place is Hammond, Indiana, I think, in October. It was up here in Troy, Ohio last weekend. I went up for it. We were able to draw enough traffic there that they met their demands for the crowds Friday before the show was over Sunday. So we were pleased to be involved with that. So I got plans from the man who gave the plans to the builder of the full car, and I built a replica of it. And that's what I have here. is what the railroad car looks like. I'll have it up there, you can look at it. This is 48 feet long. This is made out of plastic parts. Kid Bash, a lot of different things to come up with this. I got the color plans from the guy, Dr. Wisłowski, who developed the plans for Floppy to build the original car, which is 48 foot long. This is 22 foot. And then they wanted, when he got to Springfield, where he could be buried, they wanted a special hearse be pulled by horses. So this is the hearse that pulled, they got the hearse from St. Louis, put it on a train and hauled it to Springfield to carry him from the train over to the burial place where he's buried in Springfield, Illinois. So this is my latest venture. I don't have a talk about it, but kind of new out of the box. Well, I appreciate your attention. Is there any other questions? I'm sorry I didn't have the slide. That was my fault. But my grandson had done some work on his college course and used my little stick for that purpose, and apparently that survived and my picture went away. But one other thing is a visiting person here in Mariemont for the last 4 years. I've been very impressed with the way you run your town. You're blessed with a great mayor, not because he's here, but very open to talk to people, involved, trying to maintain good businesses here, other practices. You have a great police force, a great fire department. It's a blessing to be around here. And I live in Anderson Township. They do a respectable job, but thanks to the mayor and other people like the chief and other people like yourself, it's a very viable community. So appreciate your hospitality.
Thank you.
Janice Walter. I just want to ask real quick, have you written anything or?
The only thing I've written basically is on that cover sheet. And that talks about competition, not a good thing, and about the importance of railroad transportation to Hagenbeck, Wallace, Ringling Brothers, and those services and so forth. So that's really what I've written.
So you're going to write a book, though, right?
Yeah. Let me write the Enquirer first.
Yeah.
Well, put that on tape, your information, because that's just so important. Don't take the time to write it. Just tell a lot of your stories.
Well, Terrace Park got, I think, a pictorial copy of my presentation. They might be willing to. Sure, Mrs. Rogers, the manager down there. The only problem with that event is the fact that they're only open on that behind the church, noon to 3 o'clock on Thursday. When I gave my talk at the Terrace Park Historical Society, making just basically this presentation, there was about 60 people there. And I asked for a show of hands how many had been down to the museum. I think only 40% had. But I was pleased to put it in there because I think the kids can always see it. And I heard something about your museum going out of business. I think that's, I didn't know where your museum was here, but it was over in the corner there by the variety.
So the one downtown, they're going to restore that, renovate it. And it's going to take 3 years.
Downtown museum?
Yeah,
Oh, Union Terminal, okay.
Terminal.
Well, if you wrote a book, because you have pictures of this all documented, it would just be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, basically what I have is what I've left behind here, so it's on that 3-page.
Well, here, could you,
I mean,
I was going to say the one objective.
What was that man's name he wanted to put up his name? Keith, is it Vogel?
Daryl. Hey.
I'll let you look at these pulling out to you, because here, I didn't pass it. Charles Short. Barb Castro. I didn't know his wife was here.
That's his daughter.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. Dee Volter.
That's me.
Okay.
Oh!
Right.
And this is Peggy, is it Keys? I hope we had that many. Okay.
I'll trade you. Suspension bridge?
That's the one he wants.
I can buy one at the store.
His
I'll get that.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, while we have wheeling and dealing going on here, thank you all for coming, and thank you, George. It was fascinating, so I appreciate the.
Yeah, I like that.
This was
Always been up there.
I know.
Next meeting, the
I'm gonna stop
Congress
drinking it.
here.
Well, we might go out and do it if you want.
okay. Great weekend.
Well, you'll be here, right? Didn't see you here.
Yeah, that's the one that's without permission.
Who
K-Line.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a fight over.
Well, they get cars back in the back again?
Not her cars.
Well, her car's all the way back, that old blue one?
They don't run.
We've been in here, we've listened to so many people out of that house and him so many times.
Where was the coffin? Was the coffin publicly displayed when this train went through?
Yes, it was elevated platform. If you go to our doctor,
They still do that? They don't do that.
their funeral directors on next car.
I don't see their commercials anymore.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah, right.
Put flowers in it, cut down the odor. And it wasn't like mummified. Well, I think the chemicals
Bishop,
and other
who's the
things
printer
involved.
from the school, and then Ralph retired,
Was it
and
full
so then,
procession?
but I should take some to the
When he
garden.
died,
A
the
lot
time
of
he was
ladies,
buried.
I sent one to Pollyanna, people who are out of town.
Yeah.
Well, I think it took them 12 days to go across country.
And we made it the size it was.
And because the railroad has 4 sets of wheels to carry the weight of the armor
But you know,
plate.
the thing is, I used to.
And even then, they had to take and build tracks on a barge from Cleveland, Ohio, and take them with a tugboat across the other side of the lake to hook up the tracks for the rest of the trip.
Well, I phoned them last spring, and I said, even if we could get other organizations to contribute money towards the calendar. You know, Dan, I called it Superintendent Jones.
I know she wanted to sell the house.
Who was the I remember seeing.
Sometimes
Keep that if you want.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Dan, my son-in-law is coming in for the porch rally.
You got a Porsche?
No,